What unsettled me most was not that remote viewers described disasters, collapsing systems, or strange shifts in human behavior. It was the silence that appeared after the year 2030, as if the signal itself had dissolved into static. For decades, researchers involved in consciousness experiments noticed a strange pattern. Participants could often describe distant locations, hidden objects, or future probabilities with surprising accuracy. Some sessions were vague, others remarkably detailed. But again and again, when attention moved beyond a certain point in the future, the clarity weakened, the emotional texture disappeared, images became fragmented, timelines bent inward like reflections in disturbed water. I began asking myself a deeper question: what if the problem is not that the future cannot be seen? What if human consciousness itself changes so dramatically after a certain threshold that the methods we currently use no longer function in the same way? Most people imagine consciousness as something trapped inside the brain, a private electrical event sealed within the skull. But the more I study ancient systems of human understanding alongside modern neuroscience, the harder that explanation becomes to accept. Our emotions alter the chemistry of our bodies within seconds. Thoughts reshape neural pathways. Stress changes immune responses. Hope changes recovery rates. The body listens to the mind continuously, and the mind responds to invisible fields of emotion around it. If consciousness interacts with reality rather than merely observing it, then remote viewing may depend on resonance more than distance. In other words, we do not simply look into the future, we connect with energetic probabilities that already exist as patterns. That changes everything, because probabilities are stable only while the emotional and biological structure of humanity remains relatively stable. When collective emotions shift dramatically, the field itself may reorganize. It would be like trying to tune an old radio into a station that no longer broadcasts on the same frequency. I have noticed something fascinating in both scientific literature and ancient teachings. Human perception expands during periods of coherence. When the heart, nervous system, and emotional state align, intuition becomes stronger. People sense events before they happen. Creativity increases. Time itself feels different. But during periods of fear, fragmentation, and uncertainty, perception narrows. The body enters survival mode. Awareness contracts toward immediate threats. Now imagine an entire civilization moving through that process at once. Many remote viewers described a sensation near 2030 that felt impossible to define. Some spoke of a wall. Others described fog, brightness, or a complete absence of recognizable imagery. A few reported overwhelming emotional intensity, as if humanity itself was transitioning through a psychological doorway. I do not believe this necessarily points to catastrophe. In fact, I think our obsession with disaster prevents us from understanding something much more important. Transformation often looks chaotic from inside the experience. When a person begins healing emotionally, their identity temporarily destabilizes. Old beliefs collapse before new clarity forms. The nervous system reacts, relationships shift, habits dissolve. The process can feel frightening even when it ultimately leads toward growth. Entire societies may experience similar transitions. What appears to be confusion on the surface may actually be reorganization underneath. There is another possibility few people consider. Remote viewing depends heavily on symbolic interpretation. The mind translates non-local information into images the brain can understand. But what happens when the future contains conditions with no current psychological reference point? Our brains interpret reality through memory. We compare new experiences to existing patterns. If humanity evolves into emotional and technological states unlike anything we currently recognize, the present mind may struggle to decode those signals accurately. This could explain why some viewers report abstract geometries, intense light, or non-linear sensations instead of clear future events. They may not be seeing nothing. They may be encountering realities beyond the symbolic language of today's consciousness. I think this is where the mind-body connection becomes essential. Every emotion carries biological consequences. Fear tightens muscles, shortens breath, and limits perception. Gratitude softens the nervous system and increases coherence between heart rhythms and brain activity. Our state of being influences how much information we can process from the world around us. If humanity is approaching a period where consciousness itself becomes more influential in shaping reality, then emotional mastery may become more important than technological advancement. That idea appears repeatedly across ancient cultures, though often hidden beneath metaphorical language. Civilizations separated by oceans still described human beings as carriers of immense inner potential. They believed perception could expand beyond ordinary senses when the body and emotions reached balance. Modern science is beginning to explore similar territory through studies involving neuroplasticity, electromagnetic fields, and collective behavior. Perhaps the real mystery surrounding 2030 is not about prediction at all. Perhaps it is about participation. Maybe remote viewers struggle to see beyond that point because humanity enters a phase where the future becomes increasingly responsive to collective emotional states rather than fixed probabilities. The clearer the connection between consciousness and reality becomes, the less permanent future timelines appear. I often think about how quickly human biology responds to invisible emotional environments. Walk into a room after an argument and the body senses tension before a single word is spoken. Sit beside someone calm and deeply present, and breathing naturally slows. We are constantly exchanging information beneath conscious awareness. If millions of people begin shifting their inner state simultaneously through technological dependence, environmental pressure, or awakening self-awareness, the collective field remote viewers access could transform faster than our current models can measure with any reliable level of precision. And if that is true, then every thought we repeatedly energize, every emotion we embody, and every belief we reinforce may influence the very field those viewers attempt to perceive, which means the silence beyond 2030 may not be emptiness. It may be a mirror waiting for humanity to decide what kind of mind we will carry into the next stage of our evolution, and whether we are emotionally prepared to witness what happens when consciousness finally begins to express itself through the structure of reality in ways our ancestors may have sensed intuitively, but could never fully explain. I believe this is why so many people feel an unusual emotional pressure in recent years without understanding where it comes from. Beneath the noise of daily life, something deeper is shifting inside the human nervous system. People are questioning old identities, reevaluating relationships, and sensing instability in systems they once trusted completely. Even those who never think about consciousness research often describe the same feeling, the sensation that time is accelerating. What fascinates me is that this perception is not entirely psychological. Studies on stress, attention, and memory show that the human brain processes time differently depending on emotional intensity. Repetitive routines make years feel compressed in memory, while emotionally meaningful experiences expand our perception of time. In periods of rapid collective change, consciousness may interpret reality through an entirely different internal rhythm. This matters because remote viewing appears deeply connected to perception itself. If the human mind uses emotional patterns to organize reality into understandable sequences, then massive changes in collective emotion could disrupt how future information is interpreted. It would not simply affect one individual viewer. It could alter the informational environment they are attempting to access. I sometimes compare it to standing beside the ocean during calm weather versus during a storm. The water is the same, but clarity changes completely. When the surface is calm, deeper structures become visible. When turbulence increases, reflection fragments into distortion. Human consciousness may work the same way. For centuries, ancient cultures described the importance of inner stillness, not as philosophy, but as technology of perception. Breath control, emotional discipline, focused awareness, and connection to natural rhythms were considered practical methods for expanding human capability. Today, modern biology is revealing how profoundly those practices affect the body. Breathing patterns influence heart rhythms influence brain states affect perception, memory, and emotional regulation. The body is not separate from consciousness. It is the instrument through which consciousness interprets reality. That realization changes how we think about the future itself. Most people assume the future already exists in a fixed form somewhere ahead of us, waiting to unfold. But many remote viewing experiments suggest probabilities behave more like fluid patterns than permanent destinations. Certain events appear highly stable, while others shift depending on emotional and social conditions. This could explain why predictions often fail when they become widely known. Once enough people emotionally react to a possible future, behavior changes, decisions shift, fear alters systems, attention itself becomes an active force. The predicted outcome may reorganize because consciousness has interacted with the probability field surrounding it. And if humanity approaches a period where billions of minds become emotionally synchronized through technology, media, and global communication, then the future could become increasingly unstable from the perspective of traditional remote viewing methods. I think many people underestimate the biological consequences of constant emotional stimulation. The human nervous system evolved within natural cycles of silence, darkness, movement, and direct human connection. Now we exist inside uninterrupted streams of information designed to capture attention continuously. The brain rarely enters true stillness. Emotion becomes amplified. Fear spreads instantly across networks. Anxiety loops reinforce themselves hour after hour. Over time, this changes perception. A nervous system trapped in chronic stimulation loses sensitivity to subtle information. Intuition weakens beneath noise. The body remains alert even during rest. We become reactive rather than reflective. And yet, at the exact same time, many people are beginning to rediscover practices that restore coherence. Meditation, breath work, emotional healing, time in nature, mindful movement, and intentional silence are becoming more common across cultures. It is almost as if humanity is unconsciously searching for balance before crossing some invisible threshold. That pattern appears repeatedly in human history. Periods of instability often awaken deeper capacities within ordinary people. Crisis forces reflection. Reflection expands awareness. Awareness changes behavior. Perhaps the inability to see clearly beyond 2030 reflects a transition between two different modes of human existence. One mode is dominated by survival, external authority, and emotional fragmentation. The other may involve greater internal awareness, stronger mind-body integration, and recognition that consciousness influences reality more directly than we once believed. Transitions between systems are rarely smooth. Think about what happens inside the body during transformation. Muscles strengthen through stress and recovery. The immune system adapts through exposure and response. Even the brain reorganizes itself by weakening old neural pathways before establishing new ones. Temporary confusion is often part of adaptation. Societies may undergo similar processes. When old assumptions collapse, uncertainty rises temporarily. People feel emotionally disoriented because the mental maps they depended upon no longer match reality. This creates fear, but it also creates opportunity. In moments of uncertainty, consciousness becomes more flexible. New perceptions emerge. Hidden patterns become visible. I suspect this is one reason interest in consciousness research has expanded so dramatically. People intuitively sense that external solutions alone cannot resolve internal fragmentation. Technology can increase efficiency, but it cannot create emotional coherence. Information can educate the intellect while leaving the nervous system overwhelmed. Real transformation requires alignment between thought, emotion, and biology. Without that alignment, humanity becomes powerful without becoming wise. And perhaps that is the deeper warning hidden within the mystery surrounding 2030. Not a warning about destruction, but about imbalance. If consciousness truly shapes perception and probability, then collective emotional states may influence civilization more profoundly than political systems or technological inventions. Fear-driven societies create different futures than emotionally coherent ones. The body responds differently. Decision-making changes, creativity changes, relationships change. Even our ability to perceive reality changes. I often wonder whether future generations will look back at this era as the moment humanity discovered that consciousness was never passive. Every emotional pattern we repeat trains the nervous system to interpret reality in specific ways. Every belief strengthens certain neural pathways while weakening others. Over time, entire civilizations begin reflecting the emotional habits they collectively embody, which raises a question that remote viewing alone may never fully answer. If the future becomes increasingly shaped by the consciousness of those creating it, then perhaps the reason viewers encounter uncertainty beyond 2030 is because humanity itself has not yet decided who we are becoming, and somewhere beneath the noise of modern life, millions of people are beginning to sense that the next stage of human evolution may depend less on what we invent externally and far more on what we awaken internally before the window of transformation fully opens into something entirely unprecedented. Because once consciousness begins recognizing its own influence over reality, the entire structure of human behavior may change in ways we are only beginning to imagine. I have spent years examining reports from individuals who describe moments of heightened perception, experiences where intuition became unusually precise, where time seemed to slow, or where emotional connection appeared to transmit information beyond ordinary senses. What strikes me most is not the rarity of these experiences, but how often they emerge during periods of intense emotional clarity. Not emotional chaos. Clarity. There is a profound difference between heightened stimulation and heightened awareness. Modern culture often confuses the two. Constant noise, urgency, and distraction create stimulation, but awareness requires coherence. It requires the nervous system to move beyond survival patterns into a state where subtle information becomes detectable. This may explain why remote viewing has always been difficult to reproduce consistently under rigid laboratory pressure alone. Consciousness does not behave mechanically. Human perception changes according to emotional state, belief, expectation, and biological condition. The observer is never separate from the observation. That principle appears repeatedly in modern physics as well. At deeper levels of reality, the act of observation itself influences measurable outcomes. While many people oversimplify these findings, the core implication remains extraordinary. Reality may not be entirely independent from consciousness. If that is true, then humanity could be approaching a period where internal states matter more than ever before. I sometimes think about how ancient builders designed structures aligned with celestial cycles, sound resonance, and geometric precision. Many historians interpret these accomplishments purely through engineering, yet I suspect something more subtle was involved. Ancient civilizations appeared deeply aware that human consciousness interacts with environment. Certain spaces were created not merely for shelter, but for altering perception itself. Today, we rarely consider how our environments shape emotional and biological states. Artificial light disrupts sleep rhythms. Constant digital input fragments attention. Chronic stress alters hormone balance and weakens emotional resilience. Over time, humanity becomes disconnected not only from nature, but from its own internal signals. And disconnected minds are easier to manipulate through fear. This is where the conversation surrounding 2030 becomes especially important. The inability to perceive beyond that threshold may reveal less about external events and more about the condition of collective consciousness itself. When fear dominates perception, future probabilities become distorted. The mind focuses on survival rather than possibility. But when coherence emerges, perception expands. I have noticed that many remote viewers describe emotional intensity near 2030 not only as confusion, but as amplification. Thoughts feel stronger, emotions feel magnified, human intentions appear more consequential. Some even describe reality behaving as though inner states manifest externally with increasing speed. At first, that idea sounds impossible, yet we already see smaller versions of this principle every day. A fearful thought changes body chemistry instantly. The heart rate increases, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow. A hopeful thought creates different chemistry entirely. Hormonal balance shifts, the immune system responds differently. The body mirrors consciousness continuously. Now imagine this principle extending beyond individual biology into collective systems. Human societies are built from shared emotional patterns. Economies respond to confidence and fear. Relationships reflect trust or division. Creativity expands during hope and contracts during anxiety. Entire civilizations rise or weaken according to the emotional states repeatedly reinforced within them. What if remote viewers struggle beyond 2030 because humanity enters a period where emotional energy itself becomes a more visible force in shaping material reality? That possibility would transform how we understand responsibility. Most people think responsibility begins with action. But consciousness research increasingly suggests responsibility begins before action, within the emotional patterns we repeatedly cultivate. Thoughts are not isolated events. Repeated thoughts become beliefs. Beliefs influence biology. Biology shapes perception. Perception drives behavior. Eventually, personal patterns become collective culture. This is why emotional mastery may become one of the defining skills of the future. Not emotional suppression, not forced positivity, genuine awareness, the ability to observe fear without becoming consumed by it, the ability to remain coherent while surrounded by instability. Without those abilities, humanity risks creating technologies more advanced than its emotional maturity can safely handle. And perhaps this is another reason the future beyond 2030 appears uncertain. Technological acceleration is moving faster than psychological evolution. Artificial intelligence, virtual environments, predictive systems, and neurological interfaces are transforming human experience rapidly. Yet the emotional condition of humanity remains deeply fragmented. We have extraordinary tools, but many people no longer understand how to regulate their own nervous systems. That imbalance cannot continue indefinitely without consequences. Still, I do not believe the future is hopeless. In fact, I think the growing interest in consciousness reflects an instinctive corrective response emerging within humanity itself. People are searching for meaning because something inside them recognizes that information alone is insufficient. Knowledge without wisdom creates instability. External progress without internal balance creates suffering. So beneath the chaos of modern life, another process may be unfolding quietly. People are beginning to reconnect with intuition. They are rediscovering the importance of silence, emotional healing, human connection, and presence. They are questioning systems that condition constant fear and distraction. Many are realizing that peace is not weakness, but a form of perceptual strength. Because a coherent mind perceives possibilities, a fearful mind cannot detect. This may ultimately be the hidden message behind the mystery of remote viewing and the silence beyond 2030. The future may not disappear because it ends. It may disappear because humanity reaches a point where fixed timelines dissolve into rapidly shifting probabilities shaped by collective consciousness itself. If enough people transform internally, the future transforms with them. And that means the real question is no longer whether remote viewers can see beyond 2030. The real question is whether humanity is prepared to understand what it means when consciousness stops behaving like a passive observer of reality and begins revealing itself as an active participant in the creation of the world we are about to enter, where every emotional state, every belief system, and every unconscious pattern may contribute to outcomes far more directly than previous generations ever imagined possible before this extraordinary turning point fully arrives. And if that turning point is already unfolding around us, then many of the strange emotional experiences people describe today may not be random at all. I have spoken with individuals who feel waves of anxiety without obvious cause, sudden moments of deep clarity, vivid dreams, or an unshakable sense that humanity is standing near the edge of something transformative. What fascinates me is how similar these reports are across cultures, languages, and backgrounds. People who have never studied consciousness research often describe the same inner sensations, almost word for word. A feeling that the old world is becoming psychologically unsustainable. Not because buildings disappear or systems instantly collapse, but because the human nervous system itself can no longer comfortably operate within constant fragmentation. We are witnessing rising exhaustion, emotional burnout, shortened attention spans, and growing disconnection despite unprecedented technological connection. The body is signaling imbalance, and the body rarely lies. Modern science now confirms that emotions are not abstract experiences floating through the mind. Every emotional state triggers measurable biological reactions. Chronic fear elevates stress hormones. Persistent loneliness alters immune function. Long-term emotional suppression changes neural activity and cardiovascular health. The body becomes a living record of our internal environment. Ancient traditions understood this intuitively. Long before modern instruments could measure it, they viewed the human being as an integrated system where thought, emotion, breath, environment, and physical vitality constantly influenced one another. Separation between mind and body was considered an illusion created by limited perception. What interests me is how closely this aligns with emerging consciousness research today. Remote viewing studies repeatedly suggest that perception extends beyond ordinary sensory boundaries under specific conditions, but those conditions are rarely based on intellectual effort alone. Emotional regulation, focused attention, physiological calmness, and coherent mental states appear to play enormous roles in successful outcomes. This implies something profound. Human consciousness may function less like a machine and more like a resonant field, and fields are highly sensitive to interference. Imagine trying to hear a distant signal during a thunderstorm. The signal still exists, but distortion overwhelms clarity. In much the same way, modern life may be flooding human consciousness with psychological noise powerful enough to disrupt subtle perception entirely. If that is true, then the mystery surrounding 2030 may partially reflect the condition of humanity itself, rather than a single external event. We are entering a period where information moves faster than emotional adaptation. Artificial intelligence generates realities difficult to distinguish from authentic experience. Digital environments compete constantly for attention. Human identity becomes increasingly shaped by algorithms, stimulation, and external validation. Yet beneath all of this acceleration, the human nervous system remains ancient. Our biology still responds to fear as though survival depends on immediate action. Constant exposure to emotional intensity keeps millions of people trapped in low-level stress responses continuously. Over time, that state narrows awareness and reduces our ability to perceive deeper patterns. And perhaps that narrowing effect becomes especially significant when attempting to perceive future probabilities. I think many people imagine the future as a fixed landscape waiting somewhere ahead of us. But consciousness research increasingly suggests the future behaves more like a dynamic interaction between probability and participation. Some outcomes become highly stable because collective behavior consistently reinforces them. Others remain fluid because emotional and psychological conditions continue shifting. This may explain why remote viewers often encounter contradictory visions. They may not be observing one predetermined future. They may be perceiving overlapping probabilities shaped by collective human consciousness in real time. That possibility changes how we think about responsibility, creativity, and even personal healing. Every internal transformation affects external behavior. A person who resolves deep fear makes different decisions. Different decisions alter relationships, communities, and opportunities. Over time, countless individual changes reshape collective systems from the inside outward. The future emerges through accumulation. This is why I believe emotional awareness is far more powerful than most people realize. Emotions are not weaknesses to suppress or obstacles to eliminate. They are signals. They reveal the relationship between our inner state and the reality we are experiencing. When ignored, they distort perception. When understood, they become sources of intelligence. A coherent emotional state allows the brain and body to operate more efficiently together. Creativity increases, intuition sharpens, long-term thinking improves, compassion becomes easier. Even physical healing often accelerates under conditions of emotional stability and meaningful connection. What happens if millions of people begin rediscovering those capacities simultaneously? Perhaps that is the transition remote viewers struggle to interpret beyond 2030. Not the end of humanity, but the beginning of a different relationship between consciousness and reality. There are signs of this already appearing everywhere. People are questioning purely material definitions of success. Many are leaving environments that drain emotional health despite financial reward. Others are searching for practices that restore presence and internal balance. Interest in meditation, nervous system regulation, breath work, and consciousness exploration continues growing globally. Something inside humanity appears to be awakening from psychological numbness. An awakening is rarely comfortable at first. When awareness expands, unresolved fears surface. Hidden emotional patterns become visible. Systems built upon manipulation begin losing effectiveness because people start recognizing how deeply fear has shaped their perception for years. This process can feel chaotic collectively because old structures resist transformation. But resistance itself often indicates that deeper change is already underway. I sometimes wonder whether future historians will describe this era not primarily as a technological revolution, but as a consciousness transition disguised as technological disruption. Machines may accelerate the process, but the real transformation may occur within human perception itself. If consciousness truly influences probability, then the emotional condition of humanity becomes one of the most important forces shaping the future. Not someday, now, which means every moment of awareness matters more than we think. Every act of compassion changes biological and emotional conditions. Every fearful pattern we interrupt alters the nervous system. Every belief we examine carefully creates space for new perception. And perhaps the silence remote viewers encounter beyond 2030 is not silence at all. Perhaps it is the sound of an emerging future so dependent upon human consciousness that it cannot fully stabilize until humanity decides whether fear or coherence will guide the next phase of civilization. Because once enough people understand that inner transformation and external reality are deeply connected, the future may begin changing faster than any predictive system designed within the old model of consciousness could ever accurately measure or fully comprehend. And that possibility forces us to confront one of the most important questions humanity has ever faced. What happens when the human mind realizes it is far more connected to reality than we were taught to believe? For most of modern history, consciousness has been treated as a byproduct of biology, almost like an accidental side effect of brain chemistry. But the deeper I explore both scientific anomalies and ancient systems of understanding, the more incomplete that explanation appears. Human beings are not isolated observers standing apart from the universe. We are participants inside a deeply interconnected field of information, emotion, and energy. The evidence appears everywhere once we begin paying attention. A single thought can change the chemistry of the body in seconds. A memory can trigger physical pain years after an event has ended. Hope can strengthen recovery. Fear can weaken immune response. Emotional states alter heart rhythms, hormone production, sleep patterns, and perception itself. The body responds to consciousness continuously, yet most people spend their lives disconnected from this relationship. We are taught to control symptoms rather than understand signals. We distract ourselves from emotional discomfort instead of listening to what it reveals. Over time, many lose connection with intuition entirely because external noise becomes louder than internal awareness. I suspect this disconnection plays a major role in why the future beyond 2030 appears unclear to remote viewers. If perception depends partly on coherence between mind, emotion, and biology, then a fragmented civilization may struggle to perceive stable probabilities accurately. Humanity today exists in a paradoxical condition. We are more technologically connected than ever before, yet emotionally disconnected from ourselves at unprecedented levels. And disconnected people are easier to keep in reactive states. Fear shortens perception. It pulls attention toward immediate survival and away from long-term awareness. A fearful nervous system becomes predictable. It seeks certainty, authority, and distraction. But a coherent nervous system behaves differently. It becomes creative, intuitive, and less controlled by external pressure. This may be why so many systems unconsciously reinforce emotional instability. Constant stimulation keeps people mentally exhausted. Emotional exhaustion weakens reflection. Without reflection, deeper awareness remains dormant. But something unexpected is happening now. More people are beginning to recognize the pattern. I see it in conversations everywhere. People are questioning whether endless consumption, distraction, and anxiety truly represent progress. Many feel an instinctive pull towards simplicity, nature, meaningful connection, and emotional authenticity. Others are rediscovering practices once dismissed as unimportant: silence, meditation, breath awareness, deep focus, intentional rest. These are not trends. They may be biological corrections. The nervous system naturally seeks balance when imbalance becomes unsustainable. And perhaps humanity itself is approaching that threshold collectively. The emotional intensity surrounding this era could reflect the species-wide attempt to reorganize perception before entering a fundamentally different stage of development. This idea sounds abstract until we examine how rapidly human behavior changes under shifting emotional conditions. Entire societies can transform within a single generation when beliefs change. Economic systems rise and collapse through collective confidence or fear. Technologies spread globally because emotional desires drive adoption. Human reality is constantly shaped by invisible psychological forces long before physical outcomes appear. Consciousness moves first. Material reality follows afterward. That sequence may explain why remote viewers encounter instability near 2030. They may be perceiving the edge of a period where collective consciousness becomes increasingly influential in shaping future outcomes directly. Stable timelines dissolve because human emotional states themselves become major variables. In other words, the future becomes more responsive. If this is true, then humanity is entering unfamiliar territory. Previous generations lived within slower cycles of communication and change. Today, billions of emotional reactions spread globally within minutes. Fear multiplies rapidly, hope spreads rapidly. Narratives shape collective perception almost instantly. The psychological field of humanity is becoming interconnected in ways never before experienced in recorded history. And interconnected systems amplify consequences. A single fearful narrative can destabilize populations emotionally, but a coherent vision can also inspire massive transformation. This means the internal condition of humanity may become increasingly important as technological power expands. Without emotional maturity, advanced technology magnifies chaos. With emotional maturity, technology could support extraordinary healing, creativity, and cooperation. Perhaps this is why the mystery surrounding 2030 feels emotionally charged for so many people. Deep within the collective psyche, humanity may sense that we are approaching a decision point. Not a single event, but a threshold where our relationship with consciousness, identity, and reality fundamentally changes. I often think about how transformation occurs within individuals. Before major personal growth, there is usually confusion. Old identities weaken, emotional patterns surface, certainty disappears temporarily. Many interpret this phase as failure, when in reality it represents reorganization. The mind is releasing structures that no longer align with deeper awareness. Civilizations may experience similar processes. Periods of instability can precede enormous breakthroughs in understanding, but during the transition, fear often dominates perception because the old world no longer feels secure while the new one remains undefined. This is where conscious awareness becomes essential. A person trapped entirely in fear contributes unconsciously to the very conditions they fear most. Fear narrows imagination, it reduces empathy, it encourages reactive behavior. Over time, collective fear creates systems reflecting those same qualities. But awareness interrupts the cycle. The moment people begin observing their emotional patterns consciously, new possibilities emerge. The nervous system stabilizes, perception expands, creativity returns, solutions become visible that fear could never recognize. This may ultimately be the deeper lesson hidden beneath remote viewing research. The future is not something we passively enter. It is something we continuously shape through the interaction between consciousness, biology, emotion, and collective behavior. And if enough people begin understanding that relationship simultaneously, the world beyond 2030 may become difficult to predict precisely because humanity itself starts evolving beyond the psychological patterns that once made its behavior predictable, opening the possibility that the next era of civilization will be determined not primarily by external power structures, but by the internal state of consciousness humanity chooses to embody as it crosses into a future unlike anything our current models were designed to explain. Because the moment human beings recognize that inner states influence outer reality, responsibility begins to expand far beyond anything previous generations imagined. I believe this realization is already beginning quietly across the world. People are starting to notice how deeply their environment affects their thoughts, how thoughts affect emotions, and how emotions affect the body itself. Many are discovering that exhaustion is not always physical. Sometimes it is informational, emotional, psychological. The human nervous system was never designed to absorb endless streams of fear, outrage, comparison, and uncertainty without consequences. Yet, that is precisely the environment modern civilization has normalized. And still, despite all the distractions, something inside humanity continues trying to awaken. I find it fascinating that during moments of global uncertainty, people often report intensified intuition. Dreams become vivid, coincidences feel meaningful, sudden insights appear unexpectedly. Some experience overwhelming emotional clarity, while others feel an almost magnetic pull towards self-discovery and inner healing. Traditional science often dismisses these experiences because they cannot always be measured cleanly under controlled conditions. But absence of complete explanation does not erase the pattern itself. Human consciousness consistently demonstrates capacities that exceed purely mechanical models of the mind. Remote viewing is only one example. The placebo effect is another profound mystery rarely discussed deeply enough. A belief alone can trigger measurable biological changes powerful enough to alter recovery outcomes. Expectations reshape chemistry. Perception changes physiology. The body responds not only to physical conditions, but to meaning itself. That should fundamentally change how we understand human potential. If meaning can alter biology, then consciousness is not passive. It participates actively in the experience of reality. And if millions of people share similar emotional states simultaneously, collective reality may shift accordingly. This possibility becomes especially important when considering the uncertainty surrounding the years beyond 2030. Perhaps remote viewers encounter instability because humanity approaches a psychological threshold where collective belief systems begin reorganizing rapidly. Existing structures depend heavily on predictable emotional behavior. Fear creates compliance. Division weakens unity. Constant distraction prevents reflection. But reflection changes people. A person who becomes deeply self-aware no longer reacts automatically to every external stimulus. They begin recognizing emotional manipulation. They notice how media shapes perception. They become more intentional about attention itself. Attention is energy. Where humanity directs collective attention determines which possibilities strengthen over time. Fear-based attention reinforces fear-based systems. Creative attention strengthens innovation. Compassion strengthens cooperation. The emotional quality behind our focus matters enormously because the nervous system adapts to whatever patterns it repeatedly experiences. I sometimes wonder whether humanity has underestimated the biological consequences of living in continuous emotional reactivity for generations. Chronic stress reshapes the brain. It affects memory, decision-making, and long-term health. Entire populations functioning under constant psychological pressure may gradually lose connection with intuition, empathy, and higher-order awareness. And perhaps that disconnection itself limits our ability to perceive the future clearly. A fragmented mind perceives fragmented realities. But when coherence emerges between thought, emotion, and biology, perception sharpens dramatically. People often describe moments of profound inner stillness where answers arrive effortlessly, where intuition feels unmistakable, and where time itself seems strangely flexible. Ancient cultures valued these states deeply. They understood that silence was not emptiness, it was access. Modern society rarely allows such access because attention has become one of the most valuable resources on earth. Entire industries compete aggressively to capture and direct human focus. Yet very few people are taught how to protect the stability of their own consciousness. This may become one of the defining challenges of the future. Not merely technological adaptation, but psychological sovereignty. The ability to remain internally coherent amid overwhelming external stimulation could determine how individuals experience the next stage of human civilization. Those trapped entirely in fear may experience increasing confusion and instability. Those cultivating awareness may perceive unprecedented opportunities for transformation. Because consciousness influences interpretation. Two people can live through the same historical moment while experiencing entirely different realities internally. One becomes consumed by hopelessness, the other discovers purpose and growth. External conditions matter, but inner orientation shapes perception of those conditions continuously. This principle may explain why remote viewing results vary so dramatically between individuals. Perception is filtered through emotional conditioning, belief systems, nervous system regulation, and symbolic interpretation. The future does not arrive as pure objective data. It arrives through consciousness, and consciousness is changing. I believe humanity is moving toward a period where emotional authenticity becomes increasingly important. Artificial systems may imitate intelligence, language, and even creativity, but genuine human presence carries qualities that cannot easily be replicated. Compassion, intuition, self-awareness, and emotional depth arise from lived conscious experience. Ironically, technological acceleration may force humanity to rediscover what makes consciousness unique. The more synthetic environments become, the more valuable authentic human coherence may appear. People are already seeking deeper connection because superficial stimulation no longer satisfies the nervous system for long. Endless distraction creates emptiness rather than fulfillment. This is why many individuals feel drawn toward nature again. Natural environments regulate human biology in powerful ways. Breathing slows, stress hormones decrease, attention stabilizes, the body remembers rhythms modern life often suppresses. In those moments, many people report clearer thinking, stronger intuition, and emotional balance returning naturally. Perhaps humanity's future depends partly on remembering what we disconnected from during the pursuit of endless external progress. Because progress without inner wisdom creates imbalance, and imbalance eventually forces correction. The uncertainty surrounding 2030 may represent the beginning of that correction process on a global scale. Not necessarily through dramatic collapse, but through increasing pressure for humanity to evolve psychologically, emotionally, and consciously. The deeper I examine this possibility, the more I suspect the real frontier of human evolution is not technological at all. It is perceptual. The expansion of awareness beyond fear-driven patterns may unlock capacities humanity has only glimpsed occasionally throughout history. Greater intuition, stronger emotional coherence, enhanced creativity, deeper understanding of interconnectedness between mind, body, and environment. And if enough people begin moving toward that state simultaneously, the future beyond 2030 could become impossible to predict accurately because humanity itself may no longer behave according to the unconscious emotional patterns that shaped previous civilizations, creating a reality where consciousness evolves from a hidden influence operating beneath society into one of the primary forces directing the course of human experience itself.
When we explore the mystery of why remote viewers reportedly struggle to perceive events beyond 2030, it is easy to become distracted by dramatic theories or sensational predictions. But I believe the deeper lesson is not really about the date itself. It is about consciousness, perception, and the relationship between our inner world and the reality we experience every day. To understand this clearly, we first need to simplify what consciousness may actually be. Most people grow up believing the mind is like a computer inside the brain. Thoughts appear, decisions are made, and reality exists completely separate from us. But modern science increasingly shows that the relationship between mind and body is much more interactive than we once believed. Think about something simple. Imagine you suddenly remember an embarrassing moment from years ago. Even though the event is not happening right now, your body may still react instantly. Your heartbeat changes, your muscles tighten, your breathing shifts. A memory alone can create a physical response. That means the body is always listening to the mind. Now imagine the opposite. Think about a moment when you felt deeply loved, calm, or inspired. The body responds differently. Breathing slows, stress decreases, energy changes. This is not imagination, it is biology. Emotions are chemical instructions. Every thought and feeling sends signals through the nervous system. Over time, repeated emotional patterns become physical habits inside the body. Fear trains the body one way, gratitude trains it another way. Hope, anger, anxiety, compassion, all of them create measurable effects. This is where the conversation becomes important. If human consciousness affects the body so powerfully, then it may also affect how we perceive reality itself. Imagine trying to look through a window covered in mud. The outside world has not changed, but your ability to see clearly becomes distorted. Stress and emotional overload can work the same way within consciousness. When the nervous system stays trapped in survival mode, perception narrows. We become reactive rather than aware. This may explain why so many people today feel emotionally exhausted, even when they are physically safe. The human nervous system evolved for natural rhythms: silence, movement, rest, connection, and direct experience with the world. But modern life floods the brain continuously with stimulation. Notifications, fear-based headlines, endless comparison, and constant distraction keep the body in low-level stress almost all the time. Over time, this weakens intuition and emotional clarity. And this connects directly to the idea of remote viewing. Whether or not every remote viewing claim is accurate is less important than the larger principle behind it. Human consciousness may perceive more than the five physical senses alone. Many studies involving intuition, emotional anticipation, and mind-body interaction suggest that awareness is far more complex than traditional models once assumed. But perception depends heavily on emotional state. Think about driving a car during a violent storm. The road still exists, but visibility becomes limited. In the same way, fear and emotional chaos reduce the clarity of human awareness. This is why ancient cultures placed such importance on inner stillness. Meditation, breath control, focused attention, silence, and emotional discipline were not simply spiritual rituals, they were practical methods for stabilizing human perception. Today, neuroscience confirms many of these practices change brain activity, reduce stress hormones, and improve emotional regulation. In other words, ancient wisdom and modern science are slowly meeting in the middle. Now, let us connect this to everyday life. Most people search for certainty about the future because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. But life has never truly been fixed. The future is influenced by choices, emotions, beliefs, relationships, and collective behavior, constantly interacting together. Think of the future like weather patterns. Meteorologists can predict likely conditions, but small changes in temperature, pressure, or wind can alter the outcome. Human consciousness may work similarly. Collective emotional states influence the direction society moves over time. Fear based societies make different decisions than emotionally balanced societies. A fearful person reacts impulsively, a calm person responds thoughtfully. Multiply that across millions of people, and entire civilizations begin changing direction. This may be why the idea of not seeing beyond 2030 feels symbolically important. Perhaps it represents a period where humanity itself becomes emotionally and psychologically unstable enough that future probabilities become harder to predict clearly. But this is not necessarily negative. Transformation often feels confusing while it is happening. When someone begins healing emotionally, old habits break down first. Relationships change, beliefs shift, identity evolves. The process feels uncertain because the old version of life no longer fits, while the new version has not fully formed yet. Humanity may be experiencing something similar collectively. So, what practical lessons can we apply right now? First, protect your attention carefully. Attention shapes emotional energy. If you constantly absorb fear and negativity, the nervous system adapts to those patterns. Create moments each day without noise or stimulation. Even 10 minutes of silence can help restore mental clarity. Second, reconnect the body and mind consciously. Simple breathing exercises matter more than most people realize. Slow breathing signals safety to the nervous system. A calm nervous system improves decision making, emotional balance, and intuitive awareness. One simple practice is this: breathe in slowly for 4 seconds, hold gently for 4 seconds. Exhale slowly for 6 seconds. Repeat for a few minutes. This helps shift the body away from stress responses and into coherence. Third, pay attention to emotional patterns without judging yourself. Most people try to suppress fear or anxiety, which often strengthens it internally. Instead, observe emotions calmly. Ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to teach me? Awareness creates space between emotion and reaction. Fourth, spend time in natural environments whenever possible. Nature regulates the nervous system naturally. Walking near trees, water, or open skies reduces mental overload and restores psychological balance. Many people notice clearer thinking and emotional calmness after even short periods outside. Finally, remember this deeply: human consciousness is not weak. Throughout history, people have survived enormous transitions by adapting internally before circumstances changed externally. Emotional resilience, self awareness, compassion, and presence are not abstract ideas, they are survival tools for the future. The deeper message behind these discussions may not be about predicting specific events at all. It may be about understanding that the quality of our inner world shapes how we experience the outer world. And perhaps the greatest transformation humanity faces is not technological, political, or economic. Perhaps it is the realization that consciousness itself plays a far greater role in shaping reality than we were ever taught to believe.